we are melting some copper and we're about to make some sterling silver. So right here we have the copper that's going to be melted in a second, and this piece of metal right here will constitute about 6.5% of the total mass once I add the silver. So I'm going for a concentration of silver that's 93.5% to 6.5% copper, and it'll give me a nice 935 sterling silver alloy. So what we have here is the copper is basically melted out. It's roiling, and let's get you a better view. All right, so you can see, hopefully, we have some melted copper. And to that, we are going to add a little over ½ ounce of sterling silver. Of fine silver. You always melt the metal when you're making an alloy or mixing any metals together. You always melt the metal with the higher melting temperature first. So in that case, copper is well over 1900 degrees. Silver melts at about 1700 and change, 1750. A little higher actually. So if you're doing this right, the silver should start to liquefy as soon as it hits in. Now, in a case like this, you're using a lot more silver, but silver heats up real quick. So that piece of copper in there, at just under 2000 degrees, well, it's cooled down significantly now. However, as you can see, the silver is cooperating quite nicely. Now, one of the main problems people will run into when they're trying to melt, if they don't know what they're doing or don't have a lot of experience with it, is they'll achieve a partial melt and they won't be able to get the whole thing to turn into a solid globular mass. They'll just get basically what looks like reticulated areas, some areas that are smooth, some areas that are rocky, and you can just tell it's not bonded out right. One of the main reasons that'll happen for people in the beginning is they're not circulating their heat. They'll just try to focus it on one area. Silver especially conducts heat real well. So you will be able to melt the piece of material right in front of you. But in order for this whole thing to melt, it has to hit 1600 degrees approximately. I think it's 1650 for sterling silver. In that capacity, if you're just aiming on the one end, one extremity of the mass in general, the silver is constantly going to be pushing the heat farther away from the source. So even though it's going to get quite hot, it'll be moving heat away from every other area, and critical will never be achieved. However, in this case, as you can see, we have a nice, solid, and quite liquid pool of metal. So you wanna, in real life, you should be using a graphite mixing rod or something to that effect, because you want to make sure that you have this mixed nicely. Because otherwise, you will get areas that have, higher concentrations of the additive element, which would be the copper in this case. So, in order to make sure it's nicely mixed, get it super hot. With the borax that's added in, it will stay nice and clean. Now, make sure, once again, that your ingot mold is nice and hot. Otherwise, you'll experience some really nasty thermal shock once it hits in. And, well, basically, the silver will splatter once it gets in there. It's no fun. So, it is the perfect world. So, graphite mixing rod. that metal is good and mixed. So, without further ado, always remember to guide the metal out of the crucible with the torch. And keep it on it as long as you can to make sure that you keep the heat going so it doesn't solidify prematurely or cool off before you want it to. Don't be in a rush either. Make sure you have it nice and melted out. Wait till you'll know. When you like what you see, you pour. Okay. Now, we'll forge that out and get it nice and smooth. And that's the next step. Alright, so now we're going to forge it out. Let's get you a better look at this piece of soap. So, it's pretty much shaped like a loaf of bread. It's widest in the middle, highest anyway. It is basically an overall thickness, it's pretty good. It's got nice flat edges, so we'll be able to hammer those completely square. So, the first thing you want to do is draw it out. Where we're going to do that is take mass from the bulge. The bulge being the widest part of the, in this case, the center. So, okay. So we're basically going to put a big dent right in the middle, going across. We're going to draw it out. From there, we'll just draw out the entire thing by making a series of dents with the cross beam. So. Okay. Well, let's begin. Make sure it's flat. Make sure pressure is even. Okay. I'm doing it lightly at this point because you don't want to overdo it. I just want to keep it as even as possible. So as you can see, now we have some nice dents across the top. When you lay it flat, now you can draw it out. Every time you hit it, it will stretch out. The metal wants to go, it wants to find a point of least resistance. The point of least resistance are those lowered areas. That is where the higher areas will flood to. The overall effect will make the piece thinner and longer. Do it the right way. When you hammer, make sure you use overlapping blows. Make sure your polishing surfaces are nice and clean. This hammer looks beat up. Striking areas are nice and clean. Alright, so as you can see, it begins. Now we've got more room to work with, so we're going to really Okay. As you can see, it's starting to take shape.